Hi, my name is Teodross Avery. I'm here at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, and I'm about to give my performance lecture on John Coltrane. Come on inside and check it out. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be very informative. want some training, right?
Yeah. What's our bass part?
Yeah. All right, well, in this performance lecture, I'll examine John Coltrane's modal music over a span of 14 years between 1951 and 1965. During this time, the composition Impressions evolved into becoming one of Coltrane's main vehicles of expression. I'll examine other compositions that Coltrane played and studied earlier for the purpose of explaining how Impressions came into existence. The purpose is to conduct an in-depth study so that we can get a panoramic view of Coltrane's evolution from being a sideman to becoming one of the monumental figures in jazz. Now, are there any musicians here today? All right, good. Good balance. Okay, so when I speak of saxophone things, ideas and motives and stuff like that, I'll be speaking in a transposed key of B flat, right? But when I talk about the compositions, I'll speak in terms of the concert keys. So, I know some of the music people will be over here analyzing, making sure they know what I'm talking about. So, okay. So I'll start by examining Coltrane's teachers, his musical influences, and the musicians he played with. Then I'll analyze Coltrane's solo on So What, from when he was a sideman with Miles Davis's Quartet. Later I'll move on to Impressions from the Newport 63 album. Finally, I'll conclude my analysis by examining his solo on Impressions from the album Live in Paris from 1965. The solos on Newport 63 and Live in Paris are quite long, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the areas where he deviated in his way of playing and in his thinking, so we don't have to go through repetitions of content. I focus on analyzing the areas of the solos where you hear like, oh, okay, that's a change. Boom, totally different from what he just did. Now, Mr. Coltrane practiced hours and hours every day, sometimes falling asleep with the saxophone still in his mouth. His dedication to learning about music, astronomy, and philosophy added a deeper pool of information that eventually opened his point of view when he created music in different ways. His affinity for the intellect of Albert Einstein, Charlie Parker, Igor Stravinsky, and younger free jazz musicians, combined with his quest for spiritual peace, added to his ever-expanding body of music. These are the reasons his language on the saxophone kept expanding. You could listen to an album from 1959 and you hear one part of Coltrane. You listen 2 years later, you hear a whole different thing. 2 years after that, something totally different. Because he was always studying and he was always digging into information, checking things out, reading, and combining it all. Additionally, in this analysis, I'll list the different band members, the stylistic characteristics with which they played and supported the soloists, and the rhythmic and harmonic language of each band. The purpose is to analyze these musicians so that we can better understand why Coltrane went into the areas that he chose and how doing so made his music unique and advanced. Lastly, I'll list the current events from the 1950s to the 1960s which affected Coltrane's music. And this level of analysis is important because in order to thoroughly understand where Coltrane was coming from, you really have to check out what was going on around him, because that served as a stimuli for his development, because he was one of those artists that checked things out around him, as well as musicians, but what was going on in society. Now, Coltrane was born on September 23rd, 1926 in Hamlet, North Carolina, and he was raised in High Point, North Carolina. His father and grandfather died back-to-back, and their deaths became the catalyst which led to the Coltrane family's migration out of the South. So in 1943, his mother moved the family to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Up to this point, Coltrane excelled academically, eventually achieving top honors in his class. He was supported by a church community which supported each other and took responsibility for its community members. A direct product of the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. During that same year, while in high school, his mother bought him an alto saxophone, and he began to play in a small community band in Philadelphia. John Coltrane enlisted in the Navy on August 6, 1945, the day the first U.S. atomic bomb was dropped on Japan. While Coltrane was in the Navy, he joined a Navy swing band called the Melody Masters. And in this band was a trumpet player by the name of William Cal Massey. Does anyone know who Cal Massey is? Yeah, he was a composer and a trumpet player. He wrote some great songs, of which Coltrane actually recorded. After being discharged from his duties in the Navy, Coltrane returned to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was in Philly where Coltrane entered a scene of new music, bebop, and advanced harmonic study. He studied jazz theory with the guitarist and composer Dennis Sandoli from 1946 through the 1950s. Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie are two of the main progenitors of bebop, and they are part of the nucleus of modern jazz. Their music directly influenced John Coltrane and Miles Davis. In particular, Dizzy Gillespie's style of improvisation was highly influential on Coltrane. Dizzy was at his peak during the 1940s and 50s, and Coltrane played with him from 1949 through 1951. Dizzy's style is characterized by fast technique, a style which Coltrane adopted later. Dizzy often played with a maximum output of 16th and 32nd notes at a high velocity. Dizzy Gillespie's style was also a main ingredient for John Coltrane's sheets of sound. If Dizzy had played saxophone, people would make this connection a little more, but because he played trumpet, and the sound of the trumpet is kind of brash and really popping, people don't make that connection. But if you think about it, that was the closest person to Coltrane that played with that level of technical mastery. On recording Train's First Ride from 1951, John Coltrane with Dizzy Gillespie live at Birdland, Coltrane sounds like an extension of Dexter Gordon more than Charlie Parker. In the early 1950s, while Coltrane played with Dizzy Gillespie, his rhythmic concept was based in 8-note triplets. So he would stick to that kind of feel, that kind of vibe. This Dizzy Gillespie recording features short moments when Coltrane does play 16-note phrases, but the more sheets of sound style, which has become synonymous with Coltrane's playing, developed later during his affiliation with Miles Davis, after playing with Dizzy Gillespie. The 6 years between playing with Dizzy Gillespie, 1949, and playing with Miles Davis, 1955, were enough time for Coltrane to really internalize Dizzy's soloing concept. Now I'm going to play for you the recording of a 1980 from that album with Dizzy Gillespie. Just check out how he's playing. You just heard him play from around 1963, so you heard how he was flowing with his music. Now listen to this and check out the contrast. So you hear that more of a swing, mild bebop approach. That's more of a Dexter Gordon style because he came out of the swing era, but he started to implement bebop into his playing. Now here's an important thing to consider. Miles Davis left Juilliard because he wanted to play bebop at the clubs in New York City. He was inspired by the modern jazz sounds that were being created by Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, Kenny Clark, and Charlie Christian at Mittens. which is actually a few blocks from here. Has anyone ever been to Minton's?
The old man.
The old one? Oh, okay, right on. You saw it, okay. Cool. After Dizzy, oh, he played there last night, okay. After Dizzy departed from Charlie Parker's quintet, Parker asked Miles to join his band. He obliged, but it was evident that his style was different from Dizzy Gillespie. And if you listen to Miles, he's more of a lyrical player, much more similar to a vocalist, especially on ballads, than say Dizzy Gillespie, where it's all in, just crazy technique. Miles Davis played Dizzy's composition in Tunisia regularly while he was a member of Charlie Parker's quintet. So he heard that high energy, harmonically tense, and complex composition night after night. And during this time, he also had to find his own voice while filling the trumpet chair once filled by Dizzy Gillespie. Now, as artists, if we're lucky and honest with ourselves, sometimes we got to take a step back and say, who am I? Who am I on this instrument? And you got to be yourself. And Miles just heard it in a certain way. He didn't hear it like Dizzy. He didn't hear it like Clifford Brown. Now, what happened was that he was hearing Dizzy's music every night. He sat standing alongside Charlie Parker. And so what happened was his sound in his ear of what he heard jazz became that hardcore bebop New York style. And even though he changed, he still needed some of those elements in his band. Now, Miles Davis left Charlie Parker's band in 1948. John Coltrane joined Dizzy's band in 1949. As Miles Davis developed his cool, laid-back style, he needed a saxophonist who contrasted his style and who could deliver bebop solo lines with the same intensity as Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. He found these characteristics in John Coltrane. This is why I stated that Dizzy may have also influenced Coltrane to develop his sheets of sound style. Because it happened right after he left Dizzy Gillespie's band. Now, I'm inserting new information into jazz history. But so some of y'all might walk away going, I've never heard that he got that from Dizzy, but I've been researching. So. During bebop of the 1950s, this was just a modern jazz way of thinking and playing music. With Dizzy Gillespie's composition in Tunisia, we have one of the most popular compositions of the bebop period. The medium tempo swing feel and the sound of playing in D minor was established very firmly in the musicians, the composers, and the audience's ears. Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie's performances of the night in Tunisia had a deep effect on the jazz music scene in New York City. And since Charlie Parker asked Miles Davis to join his band after Dizzy left in 1945, it's safe to say that Miles was influenced by Dizzy both in the areas of jazz improvisation and in his small group compositional style. After living and working as a jazz musician in New York City, I've observed how one musician's composition and improvisational style can influence a whole group of musicians. And though oftentimes it's not recorded or put in the history books, you can just see that development and how musicians walk away feeling like, oh, this guy's got a certain style that I like, and I want to emulate it, or maybe I'll be influenced by it, or things like that. Now let's talk about the musicians. In order to understand the journey which Coltrane traveled, we must understand what was happening within the different styles of playing which he was a part of. Along with a particular school of musicians came a specific style of voicing chords. Y'all know what chords are? On the piano, when you add more than two notes together, you create chords. Certain approaches to soloing and a certain style that rhythm section players played with behind the horn soloists. The musicians that are featured on Train's First Ride, the album I just played, John Coltrane with Dizzy Gillespie, were a group of young, talented musicians who at the time of the recording were what I consider transitional bebop cats. They're considered to be transitional because although they performed with Dizzy Gillespie's bebop band in 1951, they made their most impact later during the first hard bop period from 1955 to 1958. These musicians include John Coltrane, Milt Jackson, Billy Taylor, Percy Heath, Art Blakey, J.J. Johnson, and John Lewis. They became big names later after they left Dizzy's band. These men played in a style of pure bebop while they were with Dizzy's band. This pure strain of bebop was developed in Harlem at Minton's Playhouse, and harmonically, the chord structures were an extension of Black American blues, the tonal harmony of people like John Sebastian Bach, and the 20th century European harmonies of composers like Claude Debussy and Bela Bartok, among many others. In bebop, the minor chords tended to be what I call real minor chords. There's no ambiguity. It's just it's oftentimes it's a 3-note chord, a 4-note chord, maybe a 5-note chord. So we're dealing with certain confined type of thinking, limited, great, beautiful, but it's in a certain area and it stays right there. Now it's important to define the voices because Coltrane soloed within those harmonic confinements. The chords stacked in fourths came later with the recording Kind of Blue. As accompanists, the rhythm section players played time, comping within the confines of where the solo was headed, but always staying within the harmonic structure of the song's form. There was minimal room for chord substitutions because the compositions were already complex and fixed. The bebop compositions by Thelonious Monk, Charlie Parker, and Dizzy Gillespie were difficult enough, and the rhythm section musicians comped behind each soloist while staying within the tonal and rhythmic framework of those compositions. These rhythm section players did not push the performance outside of the song's form and character. Rather, they improved the arrangement by adding shout choruses. Anyone know what a shout chorus is? Okay. Shout chorus is like after you get through playing the melody, like in Night in Tunisia, when they say ba ba da 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 da, it's like an additional section to push the soloist up. And by the time that soloist comes, he's ready to burn through the song. Send-offs, those are similar, a little section where music is played preceding the soloist, and then backgrounds. A lot of these ideas are from big band music, right? Where you had maybe 18 musicians on stage and you had to create music not only to keep them interested in playing in the big band, but also to keep the crowd energized and feeling like something new was coming around the corner. Harmonic and rhythmic freedom came later during the early 1960s with John Coltrane's Quartet leading the way. All right, now the band, we're gonna play Night in Tunisia, and we're gonna really kind of stick to a certain framework. Like I said, we're gonna stick to certain voicings, a certain kind of way of playing, and we're gonna try to create as much intensity as possible, but we're not gonna let loose on purpose, because this was the style at the time. Coltrane, Dizzy, Bird, all these cats. You having a good time?
Yes, sir. Yeah. Work about that $10.
All right, worth the $10. That's what's up. He's counting them too, right? He's like, you better play your butt off, young man. That's all good. All right. So now we're going to talk about harmonic influences. Here we have three people that were highly influential on Coltrane in terms of how they approach harmony and theoretical concepts. Over here. Thelonious Monk in the top middle. Coltrane said that he learned more about complex chord changes and melody from playing with Monk more than anyone else. This person over here on the left, bottom, is Dennis Sandoli. He is a composer and a music theory teacher who taught Coltrane in the 1940s through the early 1950s in Philadelphia. He had a very formal style of teaching. It is known that Coltrane took 2 lessons per week and learned 8 years worth of information in 4 years. He's very serious about learning and studying. And then this third person over on the right is Hassan ibn Ali. He is a pianist and a music theorist out of Philadelphia. And according to Max Roach's former saxophonist, Odean Pope, who's still alive, he said Coltrane studied with Hassan ibn Ali. And Odean Pope credits Ibn Ali with influencing John Coltrane's sheets of sound as well. Ibn Ali also examined the possibilities of playing chords stacked in diatonic fourths, which is similar to another person later that I'll be speaking about, and of using chord progressions that move by seconds or thirds instead of fifths. This is the sound which led to Coltrane's most contrasting style of compositions, which he created in giant steps and countdowns. This man on the right was a catalyst for giant steps and countdown. Odean Pope also credits Ibn Ali's approach to playing a variety of scales and arpeggios against each chord, a process known as stacking chords. I believe that the racial and economic disparities in the African American community during this time led to the invention of such sounds. It's kind of similar to how, does anyone know who Messiaen is? Olivier Messiaen? You know, Olivier Messiaen is a great composer, post-tonal composer. But when he wrote his greatest music, he was actually in a concentration camp, right? And you hear his music, and it's like you can just hear some stuff going on, you know, in here. So I believe that this is very similar to that these musicians were dealing with stuff, they were seeing stuff, and they used the music as an outlet. And as African Americans traveled the road out of the South into the hopes of the brighter possibilities of the industrial North, their bittersweet sorrow was expressed through the dissonance of the chords and melodies. O.D. Pope also commented that every important musician who came out of Philadelphia in the 1950s and 60s, including McCoy Tyner, learned from Hassan ibn Ali. Now, Charles Ives is a composer. Has anyone ever heard of Charles Ives? Okay, he's a great, great composer, American composer. He's actually a very unique person because he actually built one of the largest insurance conglomerates in this country. And at night, he would go compose music. So he had total freedom. He didn't have to play to appease people and be an entertainer. Now, he wrote a song called The Cage. It's written using what we call quartal harmony, or harmony voiced in fourths, quart, fourth. This voicing became synonymous with Coltrane. And later with the spiritual jazz movement, which was popular in the late 1960s into the 1970s, some spiritual jazz artists include Doug Karn and Billy Harper. I'm gonna do some simple math to explain why this chord is important. Most chords are built like this: 1, a 3 above that, a 5 above that, and a 7 above that, right? So that's what we call thirds, a chord built in thirds. Now what Charles Ives did was that he moved that 3 up to a 4. He moved that 5 up to a 7. And he moved the 7 up to a 10. And then he had a 12 on top. So now you have 4 notes between each note instead of 3. So what that did was it widened up the sound and the possibilities that musicians could play while they were soloing. So this was like, you know, does everyone understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
To the people who are not musicians? So now instead of having 1, 3, 5, 7, you have 1, 4, 7, 10, and 12. So you have this wide spectrum of sound. Now what's different about McCoy Tyner's approach to chordal harmony is that he played the chords with power. This approach was more like Charles Ives, where Bill Evans' approach was more understated. Now I'm going to play this song by Charles Ives, The Cage, and when you hear it, well, I'm not going to tell you what you're going to hear. You tell me what you hear. Here we go. That was 1903. Kind of sounded like McCoy was playing piano, huh? It's heavy. And so the poem that the woman is singing, she's saying that a boy saw a tiger in a cage, so that the tiger couldn't leave. And the tiger said to his father, "Is life anything like that?" So this is heavy, heavy thinking going on from Charles Ives in 1903. He was a progressive man and saw things differently. And I find it very interesting that the musicians, when they heard that chord, it spoke to them, and then they used it
to express how they felt through the music, right? So that's like some 60 years later, 57 years later, that they discovered this chord, and that this chord has traveled all the way through jazz, all the way up to hip hop. Very interesting. Okay, here we see some of the great musical thinkers from the Kind of Blue recording session, exchanging information. We have Miles Davis, top left, Gil Evans on the top right, Bill Evans, speaking with Coltrane, and then Paul Chambers in the back, while Miles Davis and Bill Evans are speaking. Now what's important to think about is that they were all working on their own music concepts, and they bring them together, and there seems to always be an exchange of information. It's not a dictatorship. People are thinking together, they're throwing ideas out at each other, and they're throwing it back and say, yeah, man, I like that, or no, I don't know about that. This is one reason why Miles Davis and John Coltrane's music kept evolving as their careers progressed. This collaborative approach is what eventually pushed each one of these musicians to higher levels of composition and performance. Now at the time, Miles Davis was experimenting with work songs of the South when he wrote So What? And so, in a lot of field hollers, what you have is that you have one person who's singing a song, and then they'll sing it, and then the group of people around them will sing it back. So if I say, you know, when I get through, you're gonna say, what you gonna do? When I get through, what you gonna do? When I get through,
What you gonna do?
I'ma have me a drink.
Me too.
You did it? He said, me too. So that type of songwriting is what we hear when we hear So What? Ba-do-ba-do-ba-dee-ba-doom.
Da-da.
Ba-do-ba-do-ba-doo-bee-boom.
Da-da.
Ba-do-ba-do-ba-dee-boom.
Da-da.
Bing, 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 bing,
Da-da.
right, same kind of concept. That's what Miles Davis was working on. Now, at the same time, Gil Evans was experimenting with orchestration. So he's combining flutes, clarinets, and horns on sessions such as Porgy and Bess and Sketches of Spain. And he influenced Miles's horn writing, making it more soft and understated. At the same time, Miles Davis was a part of the cool jazz scene on the West Coast. So he's hearing how they approach playing music. And if you check out recordings from, say, like 1958, right before Kind of Blue, like Milestones, they're playing hardcore New York bebop, hard bop. Horns are blazing, they're, you know, full velocity, they're going in. And then something changed when he came back from California. He had a different approach, along with Gil Evans and the way he was voicing chords for Miles Davis's albums. He had a different approach that he was bringing to the music. And then you have Bill Evans. He was also experimenting with chordal harmony and also modality, using modes. And he got that from Alexander Scriabin, who was a composer, classical composer. Now, let me give you an example. Does everyone know what a mode is? Probably only the musicians. Okay. So let me explain something. So if I count to 7, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I give each number a note. That is what we call the Ionian mode, the first mode. Now this is how you get the Dorian mode. You start on 2, you count with me. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. That 1 wraps around to the end. And you have that mode, that's the Dorian mode. And then the next mode, the Phrygian mode, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, right? You understand what I'm saying? So these notes keep wrapping around, and you start on a different note of that scale. Eventually you get to the last note, which is 7, and then you repeat again, right? So the thing is, with each one of those number sets, you have a chord that really brings out the character and sound of those numbers. I want y'all to understand that's what's different from the music that happened before modal playing. Before modal playing, you were more dealing with chords stacked, like I said, in thirds. Do the non-musicians understand what I'm saying? Okay, good, because I want to make sure I connect with y'all. So my whole point is that these musicians were all trading information and they were brainstorming. You can think of it kind of similar, as being similar to, say, a business startup or a political think tank for the people who come from business. I see some of my business people. You know, it was much more than music. It's a certain way of passing information along, and then the music began to grow and it began to change. Now, the influence of a night in Tunisia on So What is similar to how George Gershwin's I've Got Rhythm became one of the most important song forms in jazz, and how everyone that was considered to be a real jazz musician either had to solo effortlessly on rhythm changes, or they had to compose a song and add something to the music that wasn't there. And even though rhythm changes, as we call it, musicians call it, I've Got Rhythm, we call it rhythm changes. Even though it has its own set of chord changes, its chord progressions can be altered. For example, Sonny Stitt has a composition called The Eternal Triangle, and he does something totally different on the bridge of that song, which is Sonny Stitt's own creation, right? So this is important that we understand that these songs change over time, and that people add information. And then what you start to get is you get new compositions with new sounds. And just a little point, when Miles Davis composed the music for Kind of Blue, he just wrote out some little notes on pages and gave them to the musicians. He really didn't write out like full compositions, you know, with lead sheets and everything. So his point was, he knew the musicians were great already. He wanted them to add some of their own character to the recording session. So he was like, hey, just check this out, play this little idea, and see what you come up with. And and consequently, I mean, as a result, the music sounds so unique, And maybe a little bit of the music sounding unique is because the musicians weren't totally sure what they should do. And so, in that there's beauty, not knowing what you're gonna do. Sometimes you create something great based off of that. And Miles was the master producer and conceptualist. So he could say, okay, I want to put you and you and you in the studio, try this, and he might just walk away. But he was mixing characters and personalities together. Coltrane's harmonic concepts on So What include the use of the E Dorian, the E minor jazz melodic scale, and the blues scale. So he was already starting to mix a little bit beyond just bebop. He uses minimal chromaticism. Does anyone know what chromaticism means, the non-musicians? Basically, there are 12 chromatic notes in Western music. So he's not using that kind of sound. That sound is a very wide open sound. It's almost like looking at a spectrum of colors. When you see those charts, it has every color from white to black. And in between, you got purple, blue, every color. That is visually, that's a chromatic. They use that phrase, chromatic. That's a chromatic scale. So he wasn't using that sound yet. He focuses more on playing So What as being related to a night in Tunisia. He's playing for musicians the flat 6, the major 7, and the sharp 11 on the F minor 7. He uses Hassan Ibn Ali's approach to stacking chords. On the F minor 7, he plays major 7 chords, which are the extensions of the diatonic roots in the F minor Dorian scale. I'm getting deep on you, but check this out. I'm going to let you hear what that sounds like. So, play E flat minor 11th chord. So if I was playing more, as we call it, diatonic, I would play this. So this is what Train started to do against that. Change becomes more complex. Thanks, Benito. Here for Benito. Okay, now I'm gonna play the Coltrane solo from So What, so check him out. Yeah. You can give him a round of applause.
Yeah.
All right, now we're gonna play So What. Here we go. We'll do an intro up front. hear for these musicians out there. Benito Gonzalez, Corcoran Holt on the bass, Marvin on the drums. Heavy hitters on the New York jazz scene. You know what I wanted to do with this was I wanted to make sure, yes, I wanted to cover a lot of information, but I wanted to make sure I brought in some hardcore cats that can really take this music and explain it. Okay, so we have a few musicians over here. Does anyone know who the first musician on the top left is? That musician, his name is Morton Gould. The other one in the middle top, who is that? Ahmad Jamal, yeah. Right next to him is? That's right. And of course, John Coltrane. Now, whether John Coltrane directly listened to or was directly influenced by the composer Morton Gould is not talked about or known in most jazz circles. Through extensive research, author Dr. Lewis Porter traced the roots of the melody of impressions to Morton Gould. What is known is that the Miles Davis Quintet regularly performed several pieces from Ahmad Jamal's piano trio repertoire. Mr. Jamal's set list included Morton Gould's composition, Pavane. According to Dr. Lewis Porter, it was a well-known composition during the time that Mr. Coltrane was developing into the titan that he had become. Rather than Miles Davis or John Coltrane, I think Ahmad Jamal deserves credit for introducing Morton Gould's theme into modern jazz, since he clearly stated the composition's title, Pavane, in the credits of 2 of his albums. For whatever reason, Coltrane did not call it Pavane, he called it Impressions. Now, I'm going to play the original written by Morton Gould, and I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was a pop composer, friend to a lot of people in Hollywood, often performed at Carnegie Hall with his orchestra, and also in Central Park. One of those kind of top of the pops kind of, composers. So when you hear this, just check it out. Grand music, during that American Songbook time, Rodgers and Hart, all those great American composers. He's part of that school of composers, right? Now, as I said, Ahmad Jamal was playing with Miles Davis, and then he heard that song and he did a recording of it. Check this out.
different performances of the song, I came to the conclusion that Morton Gould, Miles Davis, Bill Evans, and Ahmad Jamal should all be given credit when we speak of the evolution of Coltrane's impressions. Morton Gould created the melody in a minor key, so he's a composer. Ahmad Jamal is a jazz musician who had the foresight and the ears to imagine Pavane being played in a modern jazz group. Bill Evans brought in the sophisticated piano voicings of Charles Ives, interval stacked in fourths. And finally, Miles Davis knew that he should bring some of Ahmad Jamal's repertoire into his own band. Like many ideas that float around a community of artists, they morph over time and often without formal direction. It becomes a language amongst the artists, amongst the musicians. With that being said, it was Mr. Coltrane who adapted Pavane over Miles Davis's So What. The melody and the chords of Pavane in their original form might not have caught Coltrane's ear, or even progressive jazz listeners in 1961, because it was real pop orchestrated music, popular music. He needed the chord voices of So What and the melody from Pavane to create impressions. This is kind of like how a DJ might remix a song today. You know, you hear the lyrics of another song over a beat that you know, and you say, oh man, I never imagined that. I think this is the same, they have the same ingredients. They had the same ingredients back then. They're taking this, putting it with that, and creating something new. So sampling is not really that new. It's just the technology that's new, you know? Yeah. So similar to how a scientist combines different chemicals to create a new chemical, Coltrane did the same but with melody, harmony, and rhythm. The result is a powerhouse tour de force performance every time Coltrane blows his tenor saxophone. In essence, Miles Davis's So What is an extension of Dizzy Gillespie's A Night in Tunisia. John Coltrane's Impressions is an extension of So What, and Morton Gould's Pavane. They're all connected either by compositional constructs or by the melodic, harmonic, and thematic content of each artist's solo language. So you get where I'm going with this? I started with A Night in Tunisia, right? Then I went to So What. Now I got Pavane in the mix, and then we'll bring Pavane to So What. So this is a little stream of music that's being created, that's being formed right before our eyes, you know, with these different musicians and their compositions. Now I'd like to talk about the John Coltrane Quartet. Pianist McCoy Tyner. McCoy Tyner's playing was perfect for John Coltrane. Technically and harmonically, he was an extension of Bud Powell and Hassan Ibn Ali. Coltrane's time spent playing with Bill Evans and Miles Davis's band allowed Coltrane to hear the post-tonal characteristics of Charles Ives and Alexander Scriabin. So by the way of Coltrane, Bill Evans became an influence on McCoy Tyner's piano voicings. By the time Impressions, live at Newport 1963 was released, Mr. Tyner had been fusing his hard bop style with Bill Evans's and Hassan Ibn Ali's piano voices, along with Coltrane's harmonic concepts. This was a harmonically dense period for Coltrane, and it was all structured. They knew exactly what they were doing as it was developing. So, you know, sometimes when people hear jazz, they see things like, oh, they just go wild, or, oh man, he just blowing all that crazy. And no, man, these musicians were extremely intelligent thinkers that knew exactly what they were doing, and they were morphing this music and shaping it as the time went by. No accidents with these types of musicians. Prior to his work with Coltrane, McCoy Tyner was a pianist in Benny Golson and Art Farmer's co-led group, the Jazz Tech. At that time, he was a tonal bebop pianist with a swing and light touch, void of the harmonic and rhythmic depth with which he displays here on Impressions. Mr. Tyner's growth and development was partly due to the freedom which was granted to him by Coltrane. This freedom allowed Mr. Tyner to explore the music both rhythmically and harmonically. These experiments all led to what jazz critics and historians often refer to as the new thing. Bassist Jimmy Garrison. Jimmy Garrison created new ways of playing the acoustic bass. He often strummed and plucked and struck the strings during long solo cadences. This is a clear deviation from how most bass players were playing at the time. Most bass players would just walk quarter notes. And that's great too, but he broke up the beat. He was fresh out of Ornette Coleman's band, and he offered an alternative rhythmic sense to the music. Now, Jimmy Blanton's style was the quarter note style that I'm speaking of. So they hold down that beat, that's coming from Jimmy Blanton. He was the first bass player to do that. Now, Jimmy Garrison says,
doom, 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 da-dom, da-dom, dom, da-dom, da-dom, dom, 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 doom, dom, 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 da-da, ba-dom, dom. So you see this change going on. Right. In addition, Mr. Garrison played with a rhythmic pulse which laid right in the center of the quarter note beat, while Mr. Jones layered the 4/4 beat with various 12/8 polyrhythms. As cutting edge as this group was, Mr. Garrison also preserved the tradition of the past by holding a steady quarter note when it was needed. Now, mathematically, Elvin Jones's quarter note pulse lay just behind Mr. Garrison and Mr. Tyner's 8-note fill, which was just ahead of Mr. Garrison. The steady movement of all of these three musicians at the same time and at different points in the rhythm is what gave John Coltrane's quartet its unique sound. So they all looked at something a little differently, but they still knew their role as an instrumentalist. And they brought something individual to that group that was unique from other people. You take someone like Max Roach, he played more on top of the beat. Elvin Jones played behind the beat, you know? So it's different ways of looking at it, and Coltrane was open to just let people do what they do. Speaking of drummers, Elvin Jones and Roy Haynes, to really understand completely why Coltrane's classic quartet was so successful, one must understand the drumming of Elvin Jones and Roy Haynes. Both drummers combined the modern jazz drumming approach developed by Kenny Clarke, along with West African drum rhythms. Specifically, these drummers combined the swing beat with the undercurrent of the 12/8 doom ba rhythms of Guinea, West Africa. In terms of mathematical equations, one layer of the doom ba fits 3 of the 8-note triplets from 12/8 time for each quarter note and 4/4 time. So check this out. So if I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You got that? I want you guys to snap your fingers with me.
1.
Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, now here, keep going, don't stop. Keep saying out loud the numbers, right? Now I'm going to give you the doom ba 12/8 against that.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
Now I'm going to give the polyrhythm. Now we're going to give you something that Elvin or Roy would do. How come you stop counting? All right, that's cool. Y'all get where I'm coming from with that? Okay. So Elvin Jones and Roy Haynes' ability to fuse West African drum rhythms with modern jazz drumming allowed the other musicians to bring a freer approach to Coltrane's music, both rhythmically and harmonically. Now you've got all these extra rhythms that you can play around with over the swing beat. Their rhythmic platforms allow the musicians to play in, off of, and around the swing fill and with the polyrhythms. Elvin Jones and Roy Haynes became the chief drummers in this style. Now during the same time, there were a lot of social events. The harmonic and rhythmic forays performed by these men resulted from hundreds of performances around the world during years of social and political volatility in America and throughout the world. So what we're hearing is complex collective thinking and emotions by 4 different men while the band is being led by Coltrane. We must examine the domestic and international social events that happened between 1959, the year which Kind of Blue was recorded, and 1965, the year that the latest version of Impressions was recorded. We should also consider how the following list of domestic events shifted and reshaped America, altering public thought and daily life. So in 1954 through 1963, we had the desegregation of public schools. In August of 1955, there was the murder of Emmett Till. It shocked everybody. No one had ever seen anything like that on the front of the newspaper. There was the murder of Medgar Evers in June of 1963. There was the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama in September of 1963. And there was the assassination of John F. Kennedy in November of 1963. And then there was the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in July. Then there was the murder of Malcolm X in February 1965. So there was a lot of stuff going on. So people are checking things out, what's going on, bop, 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 whoa, I can't believe that. Go to the music, write a song, play a solo. And when you hear them play, you can hear, even if you didn't know what they were thinking about, you know something's going on, right? Something's going on. So the music was shaped by the social events. As proof, John Coltrane recorded a song called Alabama, which he wrote after the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, in which 4 young girls were killed. These and other events left a lasting impression on Coltrane, eventually inspired him to create solos which screamed, honked, cried, and pleaded to humanity for love and peace. The social turmoil of the 1950s and 60s left an impression on Coltrane, eventually prompting him to decide that he wanted his music to be, as he said, a force for good. Okay, so I'm going to talk about bimodality. Bi meaning two. So in 1961, Coltrane recorded Miles' Mode, also known as Red Planet. Coltrane introduces the concept of bimodality, which are two modes, one half step apart, being played at the same time. Here he uses C sharp minor Dorian and D minor Dorian for all the musicians at the same time. Okay, again, you remember what I was saying when I said how modes are built? You took the numbers, okay? We're going to create a different kind of number system. So, yes, bless you. Bless you. Give me a little time to get my breath. All right. All right, so here we go. So we have, again, that whole system that I introduced to you. So we have C sharp minor Dorian. And remember, we started on 1. We said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? All right. Now, what he did, which was different from what I explained earlier, was that he came up with another consistent number system that he would mix. I'm doing this for the non-musicians, so I know you all know math, because you came here and you had to spend some money, so I know you had to figure out some math. So what he did was he took, 1 through 7, he took that and then he added that to 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, and 7.5. Did you get what I just said? Yeah. So you have two different number systems. He's playing these at the same time. He's weaving between both of these number systems in the moment while the music is going fast. It's different from how most people just say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I'm going to choose from those numbers. So he said, I'm choosing those, and then I'm going to go 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. So he might say 1, 7, 2.5, 5.5, 3, 4, 0.5, 7.5. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So it became really, really complex in terms of how he was putting the notes together. Does everyone get that? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I wasn't sure about that. I said, I don't think they're going to get this if I break this down with the numbers, but I figured that'd be a little easier for people who don't play music. It's kind of similar if you take, say, like the color of blue, and you write it on a white piece of paper, you shade a big blue like box, right? That's one system. And then you take another, say a ray crayon, and you do a box right on top of that one. And what do you get? You get purple. That's what he was doing, if you can imagine it in colors. So it got pretty complex in terms of mixing. So he's using bimodality on the melody of Miles' Mode, and also on the solo on Impressions in 1963. And what's different about this recording is that the chord tenor style of copying starts to change while he's changing the numbers. So no longer is he playing just one chord during the 8 sections. Now, on the beginning part, when it's, there's one chord that they were playing on that in the beginning. When he starts a solo, he's playing chords from bimodality. So he's playing chords in these two modes. He's mixing these 1.5. He's going with him, right? So the music starts to change. Now I'm going to play the composition Miles Mode, and I want you to check it out in terms of like what you hear. There's going to be, for the people who don't play music, you're just going to hear something different. For the musicians, I think y'all will hear it immediately, but check this out. This is Miles Mode.
making this man kick this bass drum across the room.
He's noted for that.
He's going for it, right? Cool. Okay, so around the time that he recorded Impressions from 1963, he was experimenting with Eric Dolphy. And in fact, Eric Dolphy had become a part of John Coltrane's Quartet for a number of European tours as well as here in New York City. So they were purposely pushing the music into modern areas of thinking and playing that directly dealt with what they were observing as artists. I talked to different musicians at New Train, and not only would they talk about music, but they would talk about, man, did you see what just happened? Blah, 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 blah. Man, I can't believe that da-da-da-da-da went down. Man, what are they gonna do about it? So they were putting this into the music and really thinking about, man, how can we, really try to maybe affect some change as artists through our music. And today, every bit of visual that you see in the news today is also in Coltrane's music. Same types of issues. Poverty, police brutality, freedom, and the pursuit for equality are all in his music, if you listen, if you're checking it out. Use of harmonics, multiphonics are meant to express alternative expressions which are relative to his experience in America. Use, as I said before, use of bimodal harmonic devices like playing in E minor and F minor simultaneously, used to basically feel a certain way about the music, about him, about that experience. And this type of music will maybe prompt you to think about things that you may have not thought about in your own way, maybe about some things in your own life that when you hear his music, it kind of like prods you, pushes you a little bit to hear something different, And that's the effect of music, When those tones hit air and space and they hit your ear, it's going to make you react in a certain way. It's not going to be the same way for everybody, but it will make you feel something. And during this time, he began to play duets. Not duets in the sweet sense, like, a duet. Not like that. I'm talking about a drum, saxophone, how can I say, battle. That's starting to go down in the music, the rhythms are going back and forth. It's like, bam, bam, playing off of it, and going back and forth. Maybe I can get a little bit going with Marvin. Going on in the music. And Train was probably the first person to start doing that with a drummer. But they would just say, hey, piano and bass, lay out. We're gonna play some music back and forth and get some stuff off, One of my professors at USC, he actually he heard Train in Elvin, and he said they played one song for about an hour.
They did. Hard to get off.
Yeah, you heard him.
Yeah.
And he said they were all dripping in sweat.
1967.
Yeah. Just dripping in sweat, and he said they would just play one song the whole time. He said the music that was going down in the group in general was amazing, but the drum conversations between him and Elvin Jones was just something that he had never seen before. He said he felt like he had gone to church and was listening to a sermon the whole time. And during this time, around 1963, he's also starting to bring elements from Giant Steps and count down those two compositions where he was dealing with high theoretical concepts, number patterns that he was bringing over into impressions. We're going to play impressions now, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring elements from Miles mode into impressions. So no longer is impression sounding like, an extension of So What, that real cool jazz kind of laid back sound. Now the music is changing. All those different ideas that I mentioned are in the music. So here we go. Right on. It'll be bright. 1, 2.
Yeah, let's hear this band, right? Right. Now the version of Impressions, which was recorded in 1963, was recorded approximately 4 years after the original version. So what? With Coltrane no longer under the direction of Miles Davis, he could take as many risks as he wanted, and he did so. The tempo of Impressions is much faster than So What, and the rhythm section plays totally different. Miles Davis employed Bill Evans, Paul Chambers, and Jimmy Cobb, post-bop players whose style of playing on So What was based around the ideas of how the rhythm section should play as a trio and how they should play behind each soloist in bebop and cool jazz. Here, Coltrane with McCoy Tyner, Jimmy Garrison, and Roy Haynes, this rhythm section adds a more complex harmonic sense, fiery energy, and more rhythmic freedom than Miles' rhythm section. Coltrane's new sound was starting to be influenced by free jazz and his total challenge to conventional ideas of how jazz should be played. The new thing, as some call this style of jazz, allowed Coltrane to venture deeply into his original ideas and techniques with the full support and flexibility of his rhythm section. With that being said, let's examine how Coltrane approaches his solo. Now, what's different on Impressions from 1963 is that Mr. Coltrane is definitely using E minor Dorian as his own sound. And as I said earlier, his solo on So What is probably based in A Night in Tunisia. Here, on Impressions from 1963, he has totally departed from Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker's style, bebop style. This is completely modal music, so he has gone on his own path. Now, this gentleman here, his name is Albert Ayler. Has anyone ever heard of Albert Ayler? All right. Albert Ayler really created his own style of free jazz playing. Unlike the school of Ornette Coleman, Ayler's style was based in pure freedom. It wasn't related to bebop like Ornette Coleman's style. He focused on the following: deconstruction of melody, right? So say you have a melody like, say, Bye Bye Blackbird, right? You all heard that song before, right? Da 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 da. He might say, ba ba da ba da da da, ba 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 da ba da ba 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 ba. Just totally deconstructed, which was different at this time. No one had really heard anybody just say, you know what, no, I'm not doing that, I'm doing something different. He would totally abandon the form, like with Bye Bye Blackbird, it's an AAB form with a tag. AABA is a common form in jazz and in pop music, and actually in romantic classical music as well. So he would just abandon that. There would be no form. You wanted total freedom. He would create sound and not necessarily melodies, right? So when you hear him play, you might hear a sound that doesn't sound like a saxophone at all. It just might be a growl, or it might be, you know, a cry, or it might be a yell, or maybe something grumpy. You know, kids get words like grumpy. Maybe you want to sound grumpy, right? Like that. And then what was unique about his trio, it was a saxophone, bass, and drums. What they would do was they would switch roles of what they should play. So maybe the saxophone player might play like the drummer. And the drummer might play like the bass player. And the bass player might play like the saxophone. So suddenly the rules and the roles are changed. Now you're hearing different kinds of harmony and melody coming out of an instrument. You know, like I was saying earlier, Jimmy Blanton created that style where the bass would walk boom, doom, 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 doom. Well, in this context with Albert Ayler, that hardly ever happened. The bass might say bom bom ding, dip it to ba bum, ba bum, ba ba dum, ba 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 ba. And what is that? It's more like a drum solo, you know. So you have
people changing the roles of what their instruments should sound like. And this is like the first time that had happened, so it was quite earth-shaking in terms of music, for the music scene. And now I'm going to play a composition by Albert Ayler. It's called Ghost's First Variation. Check this out. Get it?
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not. But now we're going to play the same composition. And what I'm trying to show you is how this composition and this style of playing influences Train's last recording of Impressions in 1965. And you're going to start to hear how the whole thing is shifting. The sound is shifting. Your definition of what Impressions maybe should sound like is shifting. Some musicians are checking each other out. And he's checking out these free jazz musicians. But now he's bringing this to his hard bop sound. And it's all starting to shift.
So now you've heard Ghost variation. Now we're going to add that to impressions, and then this is where we want to let you know where Train was in the music in 1965. Now, just follow me for a minute. We started at a night in Tunisia. Remember how smooth that was? Then we went to So What. That was nice and laid back. The cool jazz influence, right? And then we got into Miles mode. We started to introduce playing 2 modes at one time, with the numbers 1 through 7 and 1.5 through 7.5. So now we're mixing these numbers and colors. Then we get to impressions. Then we get to impressions, 1963. Then impressions that sound different, right? And then we get to ghosts. Now there's free jazz. Now we start to abandon the rules totally, right? Now what he did was he added elements of that to impressions, but he also took impressions and made it even more complex. Now typically in a song, the beginning of the song is what we call the tonal center as musicians. That's the foundation of the song, right? But what he was doing, he was combining sound so much in the A sections that the foundation became the bridge. And that's where he would stop building a lot of tension and he would release in the music during the bridge. Right? So in impressions, the bridge goes up a half step. That became the new foundation on the bridge. So he inverted the composition because he was putting so much together, he was adding so much in the A sections that when you got to the bridge now, you get this release in sound. Now I'm going to try to play that for you while I'm soloing. I'm going to build all this tension up in the A sections. I'm going to bring the free jazz elements into it, and then when I get to the bridge, then I'm going to cool it off and bring it back a little bit and play more inside the key. All right? So here we go.
All right. Y'all still with us? We're about to wrap this up. Now check that out. You heard what we just played right now, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play impressions, a little clip of it, of Train playing. Let's see if he dealt with some of those elements that he played on this recording. John Coltrane, 1965. And as we conclude this evening, we want to leave you with this quote from John Coltrane. He says, "Change is inevitable in music. Things change." This is why his music kept changing. He wanted to change. He wanted to keep seeking knowledge and truth and spirituality. And that's why his music kept changing. So it's all right to change. You don't have to be the same person you were days ago, years ago, months ago. You can change and advance as a human being. And that's what John Coltrane was all about. At this point, I'd like to introduce the members of the band again. Let's hear it for Benito Gonzalez. Corcoran Holt on bass. Marvin Smith on drums. My name is Dr. Teodross Avery. I'm going to take you all so much coming out, supporting us. We truly appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you.